Danny Walsh never thought he would see the inside of a spaceship, let alone travel to the most important meeting in the galaxy. He sat in his small chair aboard the human transport vessel, looking out the window at stars he had never seen before. His hands, still rough from years of fixing machines, gripped the armrests as the ship moved through space faster than anything he could imagine. 3 weeks ago, Danny had been working in the mining colonies outside Earth's solar system. He fixed air processors, gravity generators, and water recyclers for miners who dug rare metals from dead asteroids. It was honest work, hard work, but nothing special. Then his name came up in the citizen lottery program. Every Earth colony had to send one random citizen to join the official delegation to the Galactic Council. Most people thought it was just for show, a way to make regular folks feel included in important matters. Danny thought so too, until the government officials showed up at his workshop with travel papers and a new suit that did not fit quite right. Now he sat next to 4 of the most important people from Earth. Commander Jake Morrison wore his military uniform with perfect posture. Dr. Lisa Grant kept reading files about alien species on her tablet. Professor Alex Turner wrote notes in a leather book with an old pen. Captain Sam Rodriguez practiced speeches under his breath, moving his hands like he was talking to invisible people. Danny felt like he did not belong with them. They were smart, educated, important. He was just a guy who fixed broken things when they stopped working. But the lottery was the lottery, and here he was heading to meet aliens he had only seen in pictures. The transport ship was nice, much nicer than anything Danny had ever been on. The walls were smooth metal that seemed to glow with soft light. The seats were comfortable and the food was better than what he ate at home. But he missed his workshop, missed the familiar smell of oil and metal, missed knowing exactly what he was supposed to do each day. Commander Morrison walked over and sat in the empty chair next to Danny. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," Danny said. "I keep thinking there must be some mistake. Why would they want a mechanic at something this important?" "Because regular people matter too," Morrison said. "The aliens need to see all kinds of humans, not just the ones with fancy titles." Danny nodded, but he still felt out of place. Through the window he could see their destination growing larger. Nexus Prime was the biggest thing Danny had ever seen. It looked like someone had built a city in space, with towers and domes and lights that stretched in all directions. Ships from a dozen different species moved around it like insects around a lamp. Dr. Grant looked up from her tablet. According to the files, some of these alien species have been traveling in space for thousands of years. Their technology is so advanced that they consider us barely more than cavemen. "That's encouraging," Danny said. "Don't let it worry you," Professor Turner said without looking up from his notes. "Every species was young once. We're here to observe and learn, not to impress anyone." The ship docked with a soft bump that Danny barely felt. Through the speakers, the pilot told them to prepare for departure. Danny checked his suit one more time, making sure the tie was straight and the jacket was buttoned properly. He had never worn clothes this fancy before. They walked through a long tunnel that connected their ship to the station. The walls here were different, made of some kind of crystal that seemed to pulse with its own light. The air smelled clean, but strange, like nothing Danny had ever breathed before. The tunnel opened into a huge chamber that took Danny's breath away. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it, and the walls curved away in all directions. Dozens of different alien species moved through the space, some walking, some floating, some moving in ways Danny could not even describe. Near the center of the chamber, tall creatures with too many arms gestured to each other with movements that looked like dancing. Their skin was blue-green and seemed to shine under the lights. Dr. Grant whispered that these were the ethereal Zephyrians, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Across the chamber, huge creatures that looked like armored beetles walked on 6 legs. Their shells were dark and covered with patterns that seemed to move when Danny was not looking directly at them. These were the Croton Empire representatives, Morrison explained quietly. But the strangest sight was a group of beings that looked almost human, except their eyes were completely black, and they moved in perfect sync with each other. When one turned its head, they all turned their heads. When one raised a hand, they all raised their hands. Professor Turner said these were the Mindari Collective, aliens who shared thoughts like humans shared air. Danny and the other humans were led to a section marked for observers. Their seats were comfortable but clearly separated from the main floor where the real delegates would sit. Danny could see that the human section was small compared to the areas reserved for the older species. The chamber filled with more aliens as the time for the meeting approached. Danny saw creatures made of what looked like living rock, beings that seemed to be made of pure energy contained in glass suits, and things that he could not even begin to describe. The diversity was overwhelming. A sound like music filled the chamber, and all conversation stopped. The formal session of the Galactic Council was beginning. Danny leaned forward in his chair, trying to take in everything he saw. He was just a mechanic from the mining colonies, but he was also the first person in his family to travel beyond Earth's solar system. He was here to represent regular humans, people who worked with their hands and fixed things when they broke. The meeting started with formal greetings in languages Danny could not understand. Translation devices provided words, but could not capture the musical quality of some voices or the complex clicking sounds that others made. Danny found himself wondering how these different species had ever learned to communicate with each other at all. Then the real business began. The aliens discussed trade routes between star systems, territorial disputes over mining rights, and diplomatic protocols for contact with newly discovered species. Their debates were sophisticated and complex, full of references to treaties and precedents that went back hundreds of years. Danny listened and tried to understand, but much of it was beyond him. These beings had been dealing with galactic politics since before humans had learned to write. Their knowledge and experience were vast, their thinking complex and refined. As the hours passed, Danny began to feel more and more like exactly what he was: an observer. Someone brought along to watch, but not to participate. Someone whose opinion did not matter in the grand scheme of galactic affairs. He had no idea that within days, everything would change. That a crisis would emerge that would challenge everything these ancient civilizations thought they knew. And that a simple mechanic from Earth's outer colonies would find himself at the center of the most important moment in galactic history. Now Danny Walsh sat quietly in his observer chair, watching aliens debate the future of the galaxy, and wondering what he was really doing there. The second day of meetings started like the first. Danny sat in the observer section, watching the alien delegates discuss mining rights in distant star systems. The ethereal Zephyrians floated in their crystal chambers, their bodies glowing different colors as they spoke. The Croton Empire representatives clicked their mandibles in complex patterns that the translation devices turned into words about territory and trade. Danny was starting to understand the rhythm of these meetings. Each species had their own way of talking, their own concerns, their own long history of agreements and disagreements. It was like watching a very complicated dance that had been going on for thousands of years. Dr. Grant leaned over to Danny during a break. "Notice how they never really disagree with each other directly," she whispered. "Everything is very polite, very formal. They've learned to avoid conflict through careful language." Danny nodded. It reminded him of how the mining supervisors back home talked to each other when they had problems. Nobody wanted to start a fight, so they danced around issues with fancy words instead of just saying what they meant. The morning session was about to resume when alarms started going off throughout the station. Not loud, harsh alarms like Danny was used to in the mining colonies, but soft musical tones that somehow managed to sound urgent anyway. The alien delegates looked around at each other with what Danny assumed was surprise, though it was hard to tell with beings who did not have faces like humans. A Zephyrian floated quickly into the chamber, its crystal body pulsing with rapid red and orange lights. It communicated with the other Zephyrians in flashing patterns too fast for Danny to follow. The translation device in his ear crackled and provided words. "Unknown vessels detected at Galaxy Edge. Contact lost with outer monitoring stations. All fleets report to emergency status." The chamber erupted in controlled chaos. Controlled because these were sophisticated beings who did not panic easily, but chaos because nobody seemed to know what was happening. The Croton military advisors huddled together, their clicking growing faster and more complex. The Mindari collective stood perfectly still, but Danny could see tension in their synchronized posture. Commander Morrison grabbed Danny's arm. "This doesn't sound like a routine problem," he said quietly. More reports came in over the next hour. Ships had appeared at the edge of the galaxy, but they were unlike anything in the Council's databases. The vessels were enormous, larger than anything the galaxy's civilizations had ever built. They moved in formation toward the inner systems, and every attempt to contact them had failed. Professor Turner was taking notes as fast as he could write. "This is unprecedented," he said to the other humans. "The galactic powers haven't faced an unknown threat like this in over 1,000 years." Dr. Grant was studying the data on her tablet, information that was being shared with all the observers. "Look at this," she said, showing Danny the screen. "These ships, they're not just ignoring communication attempts. They're absorbing other ships that get too close." Danny looked at the numbers and images on the screen. He was not a scientist or a military expert, but he had spent years looking at broken machinery and trying to figure out what went wrong. Something about the pattern of destruction looked familiar, though he could not place what it reminded him of. The emergency session continued through the day and into the night. Representatives from the 12 council species argued about response strategies. The technological leaders wanted to build bigger weapons. The diplomatic corps suggested finding these invaders' home system to negotiate. The military commanders pushed for a coordinated retreat to fortified worlds, but every suggestion ran into the same problem. 3 council fleets had already engaged. The unknown vessels and all 3 had been completely destroyed. Not defeated, not damaged, but absorbed entirely into the enemy ships like they had never existed at all. Danny listened to the debates with growing frustration. These alien species were incredibly smart, far more advanced than humanity in almost every way. But they were arguing in circles, each group pushing their own specialty as the solution. The technology experts wanted to solve it with better machines. The diplomats wanted to solve it with better talking. The military wanted to solve it with better fighting. It reminded Danny of meetings he had sat through back in the mining colonies, when the atmospheric processors started failing and everyone had their own idea about what to do. The electrical engineers blamed the power systems. The software specialists blamed the programming. The mechanical engineers blamed the hardware. Meanwhile, the machines kept breaking down while everyone argued about whose job it was to fix them. Captain Rodriguez came back from talking to some of the alien delegates. "They're calling these invaders the Devourers," he reported. 17 star systems have gone completely dark. Not destroyed, not conquered, just empty, like nothing was ever there. Dr. Grant pulled up more data. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to a map of the affected systems. "It's not random. They're following some kind of logical sequence, but I can't figure out what it is." Danny studied the map. The destroyed systems formed a rough line, but not a straight one. It curved and twisted in a way that seemed purposeful but strange. He had seen patterns like this before, but where? The debates in the council chamber grew more heated as the hours passed. The usually calm Mindari collective started showing signs of internal disagreement, different voices speaking at slightly different times. The ethereal Zephyrians' light patterns became more frantic. Even the massive Croton representatives seemed agitated, their shells clicking against each other as they moved. By the 3rd day, panic was setting in. The Devourers had consumed 23 star systems and showed no signs of slowing down. Worse, they seemed to be accelerating, moving faster as they consumed more systems. Refugee ships were streaming toward the galactic core, carrying desperate survivors with stories of planets being torn apart piece by piece. Danny found himself thinking about the problem like he would approach a broken machine. When something stopped working in the mining colonies, you did not start by building a bigger hammer or calling more meetings. You looked at what the machine was supposed to do, figured out what it was actually doing instead, and found the difference. The Devourers were not acting like conquerors or destroyers. They were acting like something else, something that Danny felt he should recognize. He just could not put his finger on what it was. During a break in the emergency session, Danny walked to the observation deck to clear his head. Through the massive windows, he could see ships from dozens of species arriving at the station. Military vessels, diplomatic transports, refugee carriers. The organized calm of the galactic capital was breaking down as the crisis deepened. Dr. Grant joined him at the window. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. "I keep thinking these devourer things remind me of something," Danny said. "The way they move, the pattern they follow. It's like I've seen it before, but I can't remember where." "Any ideas what it might be?" Danny shook his head. "Not yet. But whatever it is, I don't think these aliens are going to figure it out by arguing about whether to fight harder or talk nicer." As if to prove his point, angry voices echoed from the council chamber. The sophisticated debate was breaking down as fear and desperation took over. The greatest minds in the galaxy were running out of ideas, and the devourers kept coming. Danny Walsh, the mechanic who fixed broken things, stood at the window and watched the galaxy's leadership fail to solve the biggest problem they had ever faced. He did not know it yet, but soon he would be the one they turned to for answers. The fourth day of the emergency session began with terrible news. The devourers had reached the outer colonies of 3 major council species. Worlds that had been inhabited for thousands of years were being consumed, their populations evacuated. In desperate flights toward the galactic center, Danny sat in the observer section, watching the alien delegates argue with increasing desperation. The careful politeness of the first days was gone. Now the ethereal Zephyrians pulsed with angry red lights, their crystalline bodies crackling with energy. The Krodan representatives clicked their mandibles so fast that the translation devices could barely keep up. The Mindari collective had split into 3 separate groups, each arguing with the others in voices that no longer moved in perfect harmony. Dr. Grant leaned over to Danny. "They're falling apart," she whispered. 4,000 years of civilization and they're acting like children having a fight. Danny nodded. It was exactly like what happened in the mining colonies when a major system failed. Everyone blamed everyone else. Each group insisted their solution was the only right one. And meanwhile, the problem got worse while they argued. Commander Morrison returned from talking to the military advisors. His face was grim. "It's bad," he said quietly. "They've lost contact with 47 star systems now. The refugee fleets are reporting that entire planets are being taken apart piece by piece, like someone is mining them." That word hit Danny, like a hammer. Mining. That was what had been bothering him about the pattern of destruction. He had seen this before, not in space, but in the asteroid fields where he worked. The way the devourers moved from system to system, the methodical approach, the complete extraction of materials. "Dr. Grant," Danny said urgently, "can you show me that map again? The one with the systems that got hit?" She pulled up the display, on her tablet. Danny studied the pattern of destroyed star systems following the curved line they made across the galaxy. It was not random at all. It was the most efficient path for extracting specific materials from multiple locations. "They're not conquerors," Danny said suddenly. "They're miners." Professor Turner looked up from his notes. "What do you mean?" "Back home, when we strip mine an asteroid field, we follow patterns just like this. You start with the richest deposits, then move to the next best ones following the most efficient route between them. That's exactly what these devourers are doing." Dr. Grant stared at the map with new understanding. "If you're right, then they're not trying to destroy civilizations. They're just harvesting something, and our cities happen to be in the way." Danny felt pieces clicking together in his mind, the same way they did when he figured out what was wrong with a complicated machine. What if they don't even know we exist? What if they're just following programming, like automated mining equipment? The idea was so simple that it seemed impossible the alien delegates had missed it. But Danny realized that was exactly the problem. The council species were thinking like politicians and generals and philosophers. They were trying to understand the devourers' motivations, their culture, their reasons for war. Nobody was thinking like a mechanic trying to understand a machine. While the human delegation discussed Danny's theory, the chaos in the council chamber reached a breaking point. A Zephyrian delegate was flashing angry patterns at a Crodan representative, who was clicking back with equal fury. The Mindari collective had fragmented into 5 separate groups, each shouting in different languages. Then, the worst news yet arrived. A messenger burst into the chamber with reports that the Devourers had reached the core systems of 2 ancient civilizations. Worlds that had been the centers of galactic culture for millennia were now under direct threat. The chamber erupted. Delegates who had maintained dignity for thousands of years were now openly panicking. Some species began declaring that they would withdraw their fleets to protect only their own worlds. Others demanded that everyone else sacrifice their colonies to save the galactic core. The careful unity that had held the council together for so long was breaking apart. It was at that moment that Danny Walsh stood up. The simple act of a human rising from the observer section created an instant, profound silence. Every eye, sensor, and consciousness in the chamber focused on this ordinary man from Earth's mining colonies. The weight of galactic attention settled on Danny's shoulders like a physical force. Danny had never spoken to more than a dozen people at once in his entire life. Now he was looking at representatives from 12 of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. His hands were shaking, and his mouth felt dry. But he thought about all the miners back home who were counting on him to represent them, and he found his voice. "You're all thinking about this wrong," Danny said, his words carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The silence deepened. A few delegates made gestures that Danny assumed meant surprise or offense. Humans were supposed to be observers, not participants. They certainly were not supposed to interrupt emergency sessions to tell ancient civilizations that they were wrong. But Danny was already committed. "These Devourers aren't your enemy," he continued. "They're not trying to conquer you or destroy you. They're just tools, like a mining machine or a factory robot. And like any machine, they can be fixed or reprogrammed or shut down if you understand how they work." A Crodan delegate clicked something that the translator turned into words of dismissal, but Danny kept talking. "Back home, when a machine goes wrong, we don't send armies to fight it. We figure out what it's supposed to do, who made it, and why it's doing something different. Then we fix it." Dr. Grant stood up beside him. "What he's saying makes sense," she said, her scientific training giving weight to Danny's simple words. "If the Devourers are following some kind of programming, then there might be a way to change that programming." Commander Morrison joined them. "Our military analysts have been trying to fight these things like they're an invasion force. But if they're automated systems, we need completely different tactics." The chamber remained silent as more humans stood to support Danny's idea. Professor Turner explained how human history was full of examples where simple solutions worked better than complex ones. Captain Rodriguez pointed out that Earth's rapid technological development gave humans experience with unfamiliar technology that the older species might lack. Danny looked around the chamber at faces and forms that were completely alien to him, but he also saw something familiar in their expressions. It was the same look he had seen on supervisors' faces in the mining colonies when a complicated system broke down and nobody could figure out why. It was the look of very smart people who had been thinking so hard about a problem that they missed the obvious answer. "I'm just a mechanic," Danny said, his confidence growing as he spoke. "I fix broken things for a living, and when something breaks, the first question I ask isn't, 'How do I destroy it?' The first question is, 'What was this supposed to do and why is it doing something else instead?'" He paused and looked directly at the alien delegates. "Maybe it's time somebody asked the Devourers what they're actually trying to accomplish. Maybe they'll tell us if we ask the right questions." The silence in the chamber was complete. For the first time since the crisis began, the ancient civilizations of the galaxy were considering a completely new approach to their problem. And it had come from the most unlikely source imaginable: a human mechanic who fixed air processors in asteroid mining colonies. Danny Walsh had taken the stage, and the galaxy was holding its breath. The silence in the council chamber stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Danny could feel thousands of alien eyes and sensors focused on him. His heart was beating so fast he thought everyone might be able to hear it. Then the ethereal Zephyrians began to pulse with rapid blue and white lights. Their crystal bodies shifted and turned as they communicated with each other in patterns too fast for Danny to follow. The Krodan representatives clicked their mandibles in what sounded like urgent discussion. Even the fractured Mindari collective began to move together again, their black eyes all turning toward the human delegation. A tall Zephyrian floated forward, its crystalline form glowing with steady purple light. When it spoke, the translation device turned its musical tones into words. The human observers have presented a perspective we had not considered. We request elaboration on this mechanical interpretation of the threat. Danny felt his knees go weak. They actually wanted to hear more. He looked at Commander Morrison, who nodded encouragingly. Dr. Grant stepped closer to him, ready to provide scientific support if needed. Well, Danny began, his voice stronger now. When I look at how these devourers move, it reminds me of the automated mining equipment we use back home. They follow efficient patterns, they extract everything valuable from each location, and they move on to the next target in a logical sequence. He paused, trying to find simple words to explain complex ideas. The thing is, mining machines don't stop just because there are people in the way. They're programmed to do a job and they keep doing it until someone tells them to stop or changes their programming. A Krodan delegate clicked a question that translated as, "How does this explain their resistance to our weapons? Because you're trying to fight a machine like it's an army," Danny replied. "It's like trying to stop a bulldozer by shooting at it with rifles. The machine doesn't care about your weapons because fighting isn't what it was built for. It was built to dig, so it just keeps digging." Dr. Grant stepped forward. If Danny's theory is correct, then the Devourers might not even recognize our attacks as hostile actions. They might just see them as obstacles to clear away, like rocks in a mining site. Professor Turner added his support. Throughout human history, our biggest breakthroughs came from changing how we thought about problems, not just trying harder with the same old approaches. The chamber buzzed with discussion as alien delegates considered this new perspective. Danny could see some of them were skeptical, but others were nodding or making gestures that he hoped meant agreement. An ancient-looking being that Danny had not seen before entered the chamber. It moved slowly, supported by what looked like a walking frame made of energy. When it spoke, even the other aliens fell silent with respect. "I am Council Elder Zarian," the being said through the translator. "I have overseen galactic affairs for over 2,000 years. In all that time, we have never faced a crisis that required us to seek wisdom from such a young species. Yet desperate times call for new thinking." The elder turned toward Danny. "Human mechanic, your words carry the weight of fresh perspective. We formally request that humanity provide guidance on how to implement this mechanical approach to our crisis." Danny felt dizzy. They were asking humanity to help solve the biggest problem in galactic history. I'm honored," he stammered. "But I'm just one person. I think this needs a team approach." Commander Morrison stepped forward with military precision. "Humanity accepts this responsibility. We propose a joint mission to make contact with the Devourers, using communication methods designed for interacting with programmed systems rather than sentient beings." The next several hours passed in a blur of intense planning. The Council voted to grant humanity temporary emergency membership status, something that had never happened before in galactic history. Danny found himself appointed as chief consultant to the mission, despite having no formal qualifications for anything except fixing broken machines. The Council provided their most advanced ship, a vessel called Harmony's Edge that incorporated technology from all 12 member species. Danny insisted on modifications that seemed strange to the alien engineers. Instead of more weapons, he wanted diagnostic equipment like what he used to troubleshoot mining equipment. Instead of traditional communication arrays, he wanted systems designed to talk to machines rather than people. Most importantly, Danny requested a manufacturing bay capable of building things quickly. "If these Devourers really are machines," he explained, "we might need to build something to interface with them properly." Dr. Grant worked with alien scientists to analyze every piece of data about the Devourers. She discovered that their consumption pattern was not random at all. They were harvesting specific rare elements while leaving others behind in organized piles. "They're not just mining," she reported to the mission team. "They're looking for particular materials. If we can figure out what they need and why, we might be able to redirect them to uninhabited systems where those materials are more abundant." Commander, Morrison coordinated with military experts from multiple species to design non-aggressive contact protocols. Instead of approaching the Devourers with weapons ready, they would broadcast mathematical sequences and engineering specifications to see if the machines would respond. Professor Turner studied the historical records of first contact between different species, looking for patterns that might help them communicate with artificial intelligences. Captain Rodriguez worked with diplomatic corps from various civilizations to prepare contingency plans for different scenarios. As the modified ship prepared for launch, Danny stood in the observation lounge looking out at Nexus Prime. Just days ago, he had been a nobody mechanic watching important aliens debate galactic politics. Now he was leading a mission that could save or doom billions of lives across the galaxy. The irony was not lost on him. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had failed to solve this crisis, using their sophisticated knowledge and ancient wisdom. Now they were trusting a human who fixed air processors for a living to find a solution they had missed. But Danny was not thinking about the irony. He was thinking about the Devourers like he would think about any broken machine. Someone had built them for a purpose. They were following their programming, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. The problem was not that they were broken. The problem was that their original purpose was no longer needed, but nobody had told them to stop. As Harmony's Edge launched from Nexus Prime, Danny Walsh prepared to do what he did best: figure out what was wrong with the machine and fix it. The fact that this particular machine was the size of a moon and capable of consuming entire star systems was just a matter of scale. The galaxy watched and waited as 5 humans and their alien crew headed toward the most dangerous things in known space, armed with nothing but diagnostic equipment and the simple idea that every machine could be understood if you asked the right questions. Danny had taken the stage and spoken his piece. Now it was time to see if his mechanic's intuition could save the galaxy from the most sophisticated threat it had ever faced. The journey to intercept the Devourers took 3 days through space that had once been filled with civilized worlds. Now there was only emptiness where star systems used to be. Danny stood at the observation window of Harmony's Edge, looking at the organized piles of matter that the Devourers had left behind after consuming everything else. "It really does look like a mining operation," Dr. Grant said, joining him at the window. "They've sorted the materials by type, extracted what they wanted, and left the rest in neat stacks." Danny nodded. "Just like the asteroid processing plants back home. The question is, what were they looking for?" Commander Morrison called them to the bridge. "We're approaching the nearest Devourer vessel," he announced. "It's even bigger than the report suggested." Through the main view screen, Danny saw something that took his breath away. The Devourer ship was the size of a small moon, its dark surface covered with thousands of collection ports and processing arrays. It moved through space with the steady, purposeful motion of a machine following its programming. "No response to standard communication attempts," reported the Zephyrian communications officer. "It appears to be ignoring us completely." Danny studied the massive ship. "Try broadcasting mathematical sequences," he suggested. "Start with basic engineering formulas, then move to more complex machine specifications." The communications officer followed Danny's instructions. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the Devourer ship responded. Not with words or images, but with mathematical sequences of its own. "It's talking to us," Dr. Grant said in amazement. "Not like a living being, but like one machine talking to another." Over the next several hours, the team worked to establish meaningful communication with the Devourer. It was like learning to speak with a computer that only understood engineering specifications and mathematical relationships. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The Devourers had been created by a species called the Architects to collect specific rare elements needed to prevent their home star from going supernova. Their programming was simple but absolute. Find the required materials and bring them home by any means necessary. The problem is, Professor Turner realized as he studied the translated information. The architects have been extinct for thousands of years. Their star went supernova despite their efforts, but nobody ever told the Devourers to stop. Danny felt like a piece of a puzzle had just clicked into place. So they're still following orders from people who died thousands of years ago, trying to save a star that already exploded. Dr. Grant was working with the alien scientists to understand the Devourers' specifications. According to this data, they were programmed to be completely autonomous. They can make their own decisions about how to collect materials, but they can never change their core mission. Until now, Danny said quietly. He turned to the team. If we can convince them that their original mission is complete, or give them a new mission that satisfies their programming, we might be able to redirect them. The next challenge was figuring out how to communicate this concept to artificial intelligences that had no understanding of concepts like death, extinction, or mission failure. The Devourers understood efficiency, resource collection, and mathematical optimization. They did not understand that their creators were gone. Danny approached the problem like he would approach reprogramming a broken mining robot. We need to give them new parameters that make sense within their existing framework, he explained to the team. We can't tell them to stop collecting materials, but we can tell them where to find better materials more efficiently. Working with data provided by the Council species, Dr. Grant identified locations where the rare elements the Devourers needed could be found in much higher concentrations than in inhabited star systems. Dead systems, asteroid fields, and stellar debris contained the same materials without any civilian populations. The real breakthrough came when Danny realized that the Devourers' programming included efficiency protocols. They were designed to complete their mission using the least amount of time and energy possible. If they could be shown that uninhabited sources were more efficient, their own programming would force them to change course. It took 2 more days of careful communication, but finally the Devourers accepted new operational parameters. Instead of consuming inhabited systems, they would focus their collection efforts on the uninhabited sources that the galactic species had identified for them. The first test came when a Devourer ship that had been approaching a populated system suddenly changed course toward a nearby asteroid field rich in the elements it needed. The collection process was incredibly efficient, and the Devourers seemed satisfied with their new targets. Word of the success spread quickly throughout the galaxy. The existential threat that had panicked the most advanced civilizations in known space had been resolved not through superior weapons or complex diplomacy, but through the simple recognition that sometimes the most complicated problems have surprisingly straightforward solutions. Danny found himself back on Nexus Prime, standing before the full Galactic Council as they formally thanked humanity for saving the galaxy. The ceremony was elaborate and filled with speeches in dozens of languages, but Danny was thinking about his workshop back in the mining colonies. Elder Zerion presented Danny with the Order of Galactic Preservation, the Council's highest honor. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, the ancient being said, no single individual has made a contribution more vital to the survival of all our species. Danny accepted the honor, but he was more interested in what came next. The Council had voted to establish the Human Protocol, a requirement that all major decisions include input from species with different approaches to problem solving. They had also created a new position, Chief of Alternative Solutions, with Danny as the first holder of that title. 6 months later, Danny split his time between fixing atmospheric processors in the mining colonies and consulting with the Galactic Council on problems that seemed impossible to solve. The Devourers, now called Harvesters, worked alongside Council fleets to extract rare materials from dead systems. The arrangement benefited everyone, but the real change was in how the galaxy thought about problems. The ancient civilizations had learned that their sophistication, while valuable, could sometimes blind them to simple solutions. They had created committees and councils to ensure that fresh perspectives were always included in important decisions. Danny received messages from young engineers across the galaxy, asking for advice about impossible technical problems. He always gave the same answer: Start by asking what the problem is really trying to accomplish, then figure out if there might be a simpler way to get there. The moment Danny Walsh took the stage and the galaxy held its breath had become more than just a dramatic rescue. It had become a new way of thinking that spread throughout galactic civilization. Sometimes the best solutions came from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the most advanced minds needed to learn from the simplest approaches. Danny never forgot that he was just a mechanic who fixed broken things, but he had learned that the biggest machines in the galaxy still operated on the same basic principles as the smallest ones. They all had purposes, they all had programming, and they could all be understood if you asked the right questions and were willing to see them from a different angle. The galaxy was safer, wiser, and more united because one ordinary human had stood up and suggested that maybe, just maybe, they were thinking about everything wrong.